The last day of testing in Bahrain has also ended, the third one, and I want to start with this video by looking at Leclerc's words because they are the most important thing to see Ferrari's performance. After viewing the race steps, we check the times, compare with the top teams, and observe the other teams and everything else. But first I want to focus on Leclerc's words. Before we start, please leave a like and subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos on the channel. Having said that, I'll show Charles's expression in the interview he did in the afternoon. It helps us understand how this Ferrari is still hard to understand in this early part of the season. If we want, in these tests in Bahrain, we saw a very different Ferrari compared to last year's. Let's remember that the SF25 is 99% different from the SF24. And so they asked him, can we confirm the good feeling that you also mentioned yesterday? Yesterday, we saw Charles speaking positively about Ferrari and the tests. And today he said that it's hard to confirm because they've never experienced conditions in Bahrain like these. That is, we have a colder Bahrain than usual. And with the track also dirtier, and we've also seen the rain, obviously. And so the temperatures are not optimal. So it's also hard to find the car's balance because one day you have to test the car when there's a slight rain. Another day you see that the track has gotten dirty. And so you have to go clean the track and you can't find the balance between front and rear. So this also compromises the car's performance because one day you find a car with a balance, it seems the right one. In fact, we've seen Ferrari in several sessions that seem to have a great drive to be perfectly balanced. In other sessions, it seemed instead an undrivable car. And so we asked ourselves why it changes so much from one session to another. Surely he did several setup tests to see which one works better. Surely the SF25 is a very different car from the SF24. We have the pull road at the front. It needs to be tested better. Several adjustments need to be made, but another thing that affects it are the track conditions, and so this was highlighted by Charles. So they asked him several times then, what do you expect for the first race in Melbourne? We expect a strong Ferrari in front fighting with Ferrari and Leclerc. I didn't see him very convinced. He was a bit more disappointed than surprised by this Ferrari in the tests, a bit like many of us are overwhelmed by a bit of sadness in seeing a Ferrari that had disappointed the expectations of the beginning of the year with Leclerc and Hamilton very strong in the fight for the world. Now we find a McLaren so strong, so constant. Ferrari is a bit past in the background if we want. But do we really have to be so disappointed, in my opinion? As Charles himself also said, it is difficult to make a prediction today in the sense that the car balance has affected a lot. Ferrari must find the car balance. And he himself said, I don't know, it is difficult to talk now because we also don't know the fuel load of the others and obviously also the engine mapping of the opponents. McLaren seems stronger car at this moment, but it is still early to talk. We have to focus on ourselves and not let the first impressions distract us. In short, there are many question marks. We are working a lot, and this helps us to try to reach the right operating window also for the first race. In short, there is a lot of work to do for Ferrari Leclerc. I saw him a bit more disappointed than surprised, so I wanted to tell you a bit about Leclerc's words because we heard him in the afternoon, and in my opinion, the impressions of the pilots in the end are the most important thing we can bring home from the tests, and it is a Leclerc a bit more disappointed compared to previous years. In 2024, a Ferrari driven by Sainz finished the tests in first position, leading to high expectations. Then, after the first race, we saw the dominance of Verstappen from Red Bull, who gave a minute even to the opponents. He was going very strong, a total dominance. In 2023, Ferrari started the year strong, but their performance with the SF23 changed as the season progressed. This year's situation appears to be different, in the sense that we have a SF25 that has not surprised in these tests, and it hasn't disappointed that much either. In my opinion, however, it has not even surprised compared to McLaren, so we're a bit disappointed. In recent years, Ferrari had been stronger in tests, so we expected them to be competitive, but they were somewhat disappointing. It was a Ferrari that worked a lot, focused a lot on balancing the car, on fixing the front suspension, on trying to work on different heights of the bottom to see how much you can also exploit the ground clearance to generate load in the Venturi channels, and they did many tests, especially with Hamilton, and so they did several tests also with the fuel load, with the engine mappings. Now let's go see everything in detail with the times. However, the first impression is that Ferrari has worked a lot without leaving too many positive emotions, without giving too many positive impressions even to the fans. They are focused on concrete data, and this is important because in the end, the most important thing, in my opinion, is to work to be ready in Melbourne, not trying to do the big time in the tests. Put yourself there in front and then see that you don't go to Melbourne and in the sense you can't find the promised performance anymore. In the tests, as had happened in the past years, this year they are much more focused on their work. Now, having said that, what is the current situation in comparison with the other teams? So I want to start from the long run made by Piastri. on the third day of testing. In fact, that, in my opinion, is the long run a bit more worrying if we want, because we saw a really strong Piastri. Yes, this here is the list of times provided by Atimini, and if we want to make a comparison, we saw Norris yesterday in the afternoon going very strong, but all the media, especially the English ones, have said be careful, because yesterday Norris was very strong on the second day of testing in Bahrain, also because the track conditions were ideal for those of McLaren, and so we saw phenomenal times made by McLaren with a car that was to be driven on a rail. On the third day of testing this morning, we observed multiple errors in Norris, which will be examined later. Now, let's focus on Piastri's race pace. Let's look at it together. He ran with C3, C1, C2 tires, also simulating the Bahrain Grand Prix, doing exactly the 3 stints. Let's read together 36.5, 36.2, 35.7, 35.9, 36.1, 36.1, 36.2, 36.5, 36.2, 36.0, 36.3, etc., etc. Let's look at the pace with C1 tires. This was with C3. Now let's see the C1 35.2, 34.9, 35.0, 34.6, 34.9, 35.1 moving forward towards the end of the run, 35.3, 35.4, 35.5, 35.6. So very consistent because it started from 35.2 and finished the stint at 35.6. Let's see with C2 tires, 33.6, 33.4, 33.6, 34.0, 33.6, 33.8. At the end, he concluded this last run. And if we think about the times yesterday, Lando even made times on the 32. But I repeat, the conditions were very different between yesterday and today. Today, the track was dirtier. It was also harder to find performance. While yesterday, there were track conditions that were also a bit cooler, with the track more rubberized, and therefore there was a track more favorable to McLaren today, a bit less anyway. Piastri made an incredible pace, so McLaren also, according to Andrea Stella, who tried to cover McLaren and say, beware that all the teams are there in front, we will see different winners. This year we have at least 4 teams that can fight for the victory, with 8 drivers, true, but Andrea Stella did it to throw a bit of water on the fire, because McLaren is currently the reference team, and we will also see it in Melbourne in Australia, but it is the strongest car. Both in qualifying and in race that is better balanced and therefore a step forward. But in my opinion, it is also normal that McLaren is in this situation. Do you know why? Because McLaren currently has an evolution of the MCL38. The MCL39 is a direct evolution of last year's car, so they understand it better. They already know how to work with it. Andrea Stella noted that the car is very similar to its state 2 years ago, with improvements in areas like aerodynamic efficiency. McLaren has reduced drag on the straight, making it one of the best in this aspect. And these small components that they improved on the MCL39 make a difference on the track. We have a car they know well, perfected in its flaws. It goes incredibly fast. It seems to be on a track, it doesn't wear out the tires too much, but it activates them in the right temperature window. So it's basically a very balanced and very strong car. Now, so McLaren comes out of these tests with the work done well, and with a great impression of their own car, because it works well on the Bahrain track, which, among other things, had conditions favorable to McLaren. We've said it. It will be retested, as he also said. Andrea Stella, testing the MCL39 in Las Vegas would yield different values. Last year, for example, Mercedes was flying in Las Vegas, so be careful that it changes from track to track, from condition to condition. Now let's talk also about the other teams. Ferrari did well against McLaren, certainly showed a slower race pace compared to McLaren. We also saw from the onboard, it was clearly visible the Ferrari was a bit more unstable compared to McLaren. I want to show you before talking about Ferrari a moment, otherwise I forget to show you. I also want to show you Norris's mistakes in the morning, because we said be careful also that it changes a lot from the conditions. In fact, for example, this morning we saw on the third day of testing some mistakes by Norris. Look here, a bit of smudging, a bit of counter steering in turn 4, and among other things, one also caused the yellow flag because he went out, he had to reverse. Here is Antonella Ghiaia, a few mistakes, let's say, by McLaren this morning, a sign that the track conditions were not optimal. I'll also show you the mistake that then caused the yellow flag, and that shows us how. Here it is. Here is when Norris got stuck at a certain point in the test because he made a mistake and went long, and there was gravel in front. Then he put it in reverse and got back on track. Here it is. Then you fell long, always turn 4, and then after he had to reverse. There's this symptom that no team is perfect. It changes a lot from condition to condition. Even McLaren makes its mistakes. In quotes, so it's there. Now about Ferrari, have we seen it in line with McLaren? McLaren appears slightly stronger than Ferrari currently, particularly in consistency. I will also show the comparison with the long run made in the morning between the different teams. So we can also see the comparison between Leclerc, Norris, Verstappen, and Antonelli. Obviously very high long runs, very high laps. We saw that of Leclerc with C3 tire, Max C3 tire, Kimi also C3 tire, while Norris C2 or C1. We see that McLaren is still ahead compared to the others. I was surprised by the consistency of Kimi. Look how consistent he remained while Leclerc did not get along well with the balance. We also saw him struggle a bit more to drive the car, has maintained a higher pace. Obviously, he also had more fuel load and a different engine mapping, but I wanted to show these times as well. On the actual driving of the Ferrari, we saw a slightly more unstable Ferrari that had some of the same problems we saw from the first day. A bit of a Ferrari that has micro slips in progress. And here in this case, we see Hamilton. He has micro slips in the corner, and so he struggles to keep a constant pace because those micro slips, those small corrections that he continues to make in every corner, because they are really small adjustments, go to compromise the tire, the compound, which gets worn out more, and so it slips more the more we go on with the long run, and so you can't keep a constant pace. This is something that seems of little account, but it affects the performance a lot, because imagine you have a car that can be perfect in trajectory. You don't have to make any correction. Even in the long run, you have a huge advantage because you can have the same constant pace from the beginning to the end, while if you start to make a correction, maybe at first you only do one curve, then you start to complete 2 curves, then 3 more after the lap becomes harder to manage. The car becomes unstable and you slow down to maintain drivability if we want. And so that is the real problem of Ferrari. Currently, in my opinion, it also derives from a balance issue from single-seater between front and rear. The transition from push road to pull road at the front certainly affects understanding this SF25 better. However, as Leclerc himself said, calm, they are just tests. The positive thing, if we want, is not a Ferrari that has perfect balance. And it's not at the level of McLaren. It's a Ferrari that doesn't have perfect balance. We see it's unstable in many driving conditions. It's imprecise and imperfect, unable to match McLaren's pace. It needs to find the right balance. Between front and rear, we'll have to reassess Ferrari and see if it can be at the level of McLaren. This is a bit of a summary of these tests that we can take home, from my point of view. And I also want to talk about Red Bull, because we saw a Verstappen who also had a somewhat unstable car. He managed to make several adjustments to improve the drivability of his Red Bull, but we still saw an unstable Red Bull in the morning. In the afternoon, he managed to do a better job. He also tried the dry lap, where he also got in first position. In short, this is good for him. In my opinion, Red Bull has also presented updates on the front wing, and it is a Red Bull that positions itself there on par with Ferrari. We have McLaren first, Force, Ferrari, and Red Bull more or less similar, and then Mercedes, and we also saw the middle finger made by Verstappen that will not be fine, but the first emblematic gesture of Max that he made, I'll show you on the fly. The first emblematic gesture that Max made, we don't know if he did it for a laugh or if he was serious about it. He won't be fined, or we'll see if he'll be fined for this. The fact is that we already see a charged Max for this season, we can say that. But in general, I have to say that Red Bull, in my opinion, is unstable, but we can't rule out Verstappen in Melbourne, and we'll find him there at the front. I don't know if he'll be fighting for the pole, because McLaren seems really superior at this moment, but we'll definitely see Max in the top 3 positions.
So be careful.
He has also done a lot of work on the flow viz today at Red Bull. I'll show you the image as well. So yes, Max that we saw yesterday always turned Lawson. Today, Max turned all day. We can say that Max's times are the significant ones. Lawson is far from the times that Verstappen is also showing, and Max's pace is really good. Objectively, we have found a Max worthy of a world champion who manages to get the most out of his Red Bull and immediately see the weak points. We have seen several times he has also punched the steering wheel. He complained about the balance of his single-seater. Surely Red Bull has also changed a lot on the suspensions because it was too rigid last year. And we have also seen the work with the flow viz to see where the flows were going on the RB21. So Mercedes instead, we saw it with a slightly higher race pace, has a very stable, precise front, but lacks a bit, let's say, on the rear that is more unstable. I wanted to show you this image of Kimi. Very interesting how Kimi exploits all the points of the track, even the outer part. This is very important that unlike other drivers, he exploits the entrance and exit better. Let's see if I have other images of other drivers. I can always show you the same curve. Here we are at the entrance of turn 11, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, turn 11, okay. And you see here, Kimi going very wide on entry to then go. Throw the car in even faster, let's say, to enter, have a high entry speed. And instead, here we have Norris, if I'm not mistaken, who is instead a bit tighter. Here we have Bortoleto also a bit tighter. So Kimi really has a trajectory in this case, but on all tracks, you can see he is very extreme in exploiting every point of the track to his advantage to have a good speed, also in transit, a high speed.
So Mercedes
convinced me as a bit too much of a dancing rear insert. In fact, there we also saw several mistakes. Going to the block, we saw Russell, who made several blocks. In short, a bit of mistakes also by the Mercedes drivers, who, as rhythm, I see them in line with Ferrari. But in my opinion, Ferrari is a bit hidden on that. So I see a Ferrari superior to Mercedes from this point of view.
And then instead,
talking about the other teams, I saw a very good Williams and a very good Alpine. Williams and Alpine are two teams that could also challenge Aston Martin, which Aston Martin is currently the 5th force. However, keep an eye on Alpine and Williams, who might be there too. Especially in the fight, Williams surprised me both with Sainz and with Albon. They are doing great long runs, great laps, and in addition, they are also very strong on the dry lap. Therefore, they are up front to be evaluated. Obviously, while among the disappointments, I have to put by force both AS, but especially Sauber, which is the team that is disappointing the most. Currently, we remember that last year, they were the last constructors in 10th place this year. They also started with a lot of effort, while the other teams are a bit in the middle. These are my impressions currently on what we have seen. I also really like the greeting we saw between Russell and Hamilton on the track. That very nice. But I must say that also, among other things, I show you a very interesting thing. This graphic here that reports a comparison between Leclerc and Norris's laps. And it is clearly seen this on the long run made on Thursday. So the second day of testing, it is clearly seen as Ferrari was already down in engine mapping and probably also in hertz. And in fact had 4.35 miles per hour difference between Leclerc and Norris in practice, so it was going to lose a lot in the first and in the third sector, in particular Leclerc, for this reason. So be careful that there are many points where one can hide in the tests and maybe show up then the first race, because he has hidden in the tests and has not shown all his cards. So this is also one of the points of Ferrari that, in my opinion, on some things has hidden a bit, on others a bit less. We have also seen the technicians measure the consumption of the plank. This is a bit more technical aspect, but very interesting. We have seen the Ferrari technicians go to make measurements on the plank of the SF25 single-seater, because we know that the maximum consumption must be 1 millimeter of the plank, and otherwise you incur penalties and sanctions that can also lead to disqualification. We saw it, for example, in 2023 in Austin with the disqualification of Leclerc and Hamilton, and so they are also very attentive to the controls on the plank. Especially, we saw a Ferrari that was very low today, that was touching the asphalt a lot, consuming the bottom of the single-seater, the skid block, and so they make several measurements to see precisely the consumption of the plank. And speaking instead always about Ferrari, so summarizing a bit everything, I see a Ferrari that objectively, we put this very nice graphic here that shows all the teams. Here it is, I put on this side, and essentially we see a Ferrari that, in my opinion, is there a bit behind McLaren, but that can approach McLaren potentially because it has not yet brought out the maximum of its own car. We must consider the fact that Ferrari is the team that among all has changed the most, as suspensions, as also arrangement of the radiators inside the car, structure of the car itself is revolutionized. McLaren has made an evolution. Mercedes has also made an evolution to the car last year. That last year had changed a lot, Mercedes, with the rear suspension revisited. Red Bull has changed quite a bit compared to last year, but not as much as Ferrari, maybe more than the other teams, but not as much as Ferrari. And so it's a team that has a bit revolutionized its structure, and it takes a bit of time to get used to. I also want to show you one last very, very beautiful thing, which is Hamilton. I want to show you the comparison of Hamilton in the FP2 of last year and this year, because this shows us how Hamilton has found himself at some moments not very well with the car, at other moments well in these tests, but surely he is finding himself better, Hamilton, this year with the SF25 compared to last year with his Mercedes. So I show here some frames of Hamilton. Look here, curve 1. We already see the very wide chord point Hamilton in this case with the Mercedes much closer to the chord point. With the Ferrari, this is a good lap of Hamilton with Ferrari that they took in the tests. We see here already a first correction with Mercedes. You see there with the steering wheel, while with Ferrari, he manages to stay much cleaner. Even here, he manages to make better use of the curb. Let's go on, even here. Curve 4, look how many corrections with the Mercedes. Look here, how many corrections? While with Ferrari, yes, some corrections there are, because anyway, some small adjustment, there is respect. Ferrari performed better than McLaren in this year's tests, but the difference was not significant. Also here, look at this curve, how it struggles more to reach the rope point. I have to use a lot of steering angle with the Mercedes, while with Ferrari, it manages to reduce the steering angle immediately. Look here, the difference is clear. That is, in this case, we have the gloves in the 12 o'clock position noon, while here with Ferrari position at 10, let's say. So there is less steering angle here in Ferrari that Hamilton is using compared to Mercedes last year. In short, it is clearly seen. Now I go a little further also here. Correction in exit curve 11. While in this case with Ferrari, no correction, many more corrections last year compared to this year for Hamilton. But at the same time, we have also seen some corrections made also this year because the Ferrari has not always been so balanced. That lap we saw of Hamilton is a lap where we saw a very balanced Hamilton, while we saw other moments in which we saw a slightly less balanced Ferrari, for example. I show you, wait a moment, on the first day it was much less balanced. We see here, you see here a bit of corrections. In short, it has not always been super balanced. We have seen a bit of corrections also on the part of Ferrari, but much less compared to when he was driving with Mercedes. I will also show you the comparison with McLaren to show you how balanced McLaren is this year. This is the simulation of Norris, who did his fast lap. The difference is that McLaren does not make corrections. You see here, it does not make corrections on the steering wheel, and that makes the difference. Then also in the long run on the race pace, in general, look here. Well, here in this case, he made a correction, but I assure you that from the different onboard, you can see that the McLaren is very precise as a guide. Let's move on here to turn 11, very difficult turn. You see that it remains very, very constant. In short, in summary, McLaren is currently the reference point with Ferrari as the second force. Verstappen's performance is uncertain, but he is always strong. Mercedes follows behind. Mercedes, also pay attention to something about Mercedes that Kimi said that it is seen for Melbourne. They're in front, fights for the top 6. And in my opinion, he could make it into the top 6. We saw a great Kimi at the level of Russell. And this surprised me quite a bit. We have already talked about it in previous videos. Great Kimi did a super consistent job on the long runs, improved from day one, both in terms of consistency on the long run. He said that his weak point at the moment is more the qualification. That the long runs, because he has to find the limit, it is not easy to also get the tires to the right operating temperature. That's the limit, but we saw an extraordinary Kimi, which impresses us greatly. Every day we are increasingly hopeful to find him leading in Melbourne as well. On the contrary, for example, Lawson, we have seen that he is disappointing a bit more in Red Bull compared also to Verstappen. Tell me your in the comments on this last day of testing in Bahrain. Remember to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. Stay updated on car and Formula 1 news daily on this channel. Check out other related videos from Lassie. That's all for now. See you in the next video.